Hello everybody and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast, brought to you in association with eBay Motors Group. It is Saturday the 23rd of October and we've got this week's industry special. We are joined this week by Andy Conde and David Bilsborough, but this is episode 55, season 7 of Motor Trade Radio, bringing you all the chatter that matters and once again gathered together the big headlines of the retail stories of the week across the franchise and independent sectors. So this week, as I say, we've got the pleasure of being joined by David Bilsborough, who is the owner of Cheshire Cars, and Mannheim's auctioneer legend, Mr. Conde. Welcome both back.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, everyone. Good to be back once again, with these two fine stalwarts of the industry.
Yes, we'll get on to you guys in a minute because we'll have a very relaxing chat about what's happening in the retail and the wholesale market. But first, let's I'll just cover off a couple of the headlines from the week. So in Motor Trader this week, Tesla was the fastest growing brand of 2021 with a 184% increase in brand value. Interbrand's 2021 Best Global Brands ranking also saw Tesla achieve the largest rise in rankings, moving up 26 places in the table. And from Car Dealer, legal action against Mercedes-Benz over the agency model shows danger of failure to collaborative approach over in Australia there. And in AM, Vanarama wins the 7 UK Customer Experience Awards after e-commerce investment. So well done to Andy and his team down at Vanarama. And finally, in Automotive News Europe, VW's plant over in Germany producing the lowest cars since 1958, a report has announced this week. So let's get on to what's happening in the market, guys. Let's have a chat. So, Andy, you've been at the auctions all week. What's happening now? We've seen the obviously increase year to date at over 22% at 3-year 60 at Cap HPI. We've heard rumours and reports that those values have continued to rise, but albeit not at the same rate. Are we starting to see a little bit of easing? What's happening out there at the minute?
I think we're starting to see a little bit of sensibility arriving back into the marketplace. We knew that prices couldn't carry on. You know, they may well have peaked for this year. There's certainly been a little bit of a softening. There hasn't been the demand that we've seen, but we're still selling an awful lot of cars, and a lot of cars are making very, very strong money. When the job does change a little bit like this, one of the difficult jobs that we have is managing our vendors' expectations, because a lot of the time people think cars are still going to make fortunes, and there comes a time we all knew that if the market was going to soften, it was going to be now. It was going to be when furlough ended. There was going to be a little bit of uncertainty around, so we knew that was going to happen. We also knew that the supply was going to come back. There's a few more cars around than there has been. Not lots and lots of cars, but a few more cars around. So I think we've just seen that little dynamic that's changed. But on the good side, and I think it's affected more of that top end of the market, this sort of £10,000 upwards. On the plus side, the bottom end of the market, the cheap and cheerful side, has certainly sprung back into action. And my view for that is that we've seen, we've opened more physical auctions this past month. We've opened, in Manchester Tuesday evening. We've opened in Bristol on a Thursday, and we've opened in Washington on a Wednesday. And I think the fact that people now are able to touch, feel, and see some of those lower grade, cheaper end cars, I've now given them an added incentive and an added confidence. They can give a little bit more money for them. So we've certainly seen that bottom end going up. But I think there's been, as I said, I use the word softening. I think it's more a consolidation of the markets that we've seen. I think people are starting to, panic a little bit. Oh my God, is it going to drop off the cliff? I can't honestly see it's going to. I don't want to be like the weatherman who said that we weren't going to have a hurricane, but I certainly don't think it's going to drop off the cliff. And the reason for that is that the numbers that are out there won't allow it to drop off the cliff. So, as I say, and the one good thing about it, we're seeing more of our older established buyers now being able to get involved in the game, rather than the big car supermarkets who dominated over the past 6 months. So I think that's probably where we're at with it.
And David, from a retailer's perspective, is demand still there? Is the activity still there from a consumer inquiry perspective? And how is it in terms of pricing those vehicles now in the retail space?
So I don't think we're going to have a Michael Fish moment, Andy. I hope not anyway. But Phil, I think the market is still strong in the retail sector. Demand is certainly there if you have the right mix of and profile of car vehicle. So I think that's really good, because we're getting into the back end of the year when things start to sort of maybe tail off a little bit. But certainly there are one or two sort of suggestions from dealers that the interest is waning somewhat, but we still continue to be really, really busy in the business here, which is fantastic. And I think with Andy's comments about the market, I think that's probably spot on as well. It is spot on, because we've certainly been able to have more opportunities through a number of reasons, really. Not least of all, we've had some people recommending the business to sell us, so that's really positive as well for us. But I think it will be a strong end to the year for most people with stock. So the critical point will be, come on, we need the stock. So if we can get the opportunities, we'll turn them into sales, I'm sure.
And how much of this, in terms of for both of you on this one, how much of this is, nervousness of how far prices can continue going up and a bit of ease in there, and how much of it do we think is, they're not so sure, as you pointed out there earlier on, Andy, around, we've seen the end of furlough, we've got half terms coming up, we've got Christmas round the corner. There's obviously, the lockdowns and conversation now hitting much of the headlines. How much of it is cautiousness around consumer demand, and how much of it is about this kind of, how far can prices continue rising?
I think people have looked at it and thought, just how much more can prices go? Let's be honest. I think we did get to a stage that you could almost name your own price, and people would pay the money for it. They would buy the cars. I think that's probably might just to change a little bit now. And I think the other thing we've got to bear in mind is, historically, let's forget about sort of if we look past 2020, so we go to 19. The period that we're in now was probably one of the toughest periods, apart from maybe sort of April and May. The pre-festive months from October through to usually the middle of November has historically been, fairly lean months for us in the auctions, and probably for people selling cars. Historically, they've always been. So, but we're now, we're actually looking at our figures now, and when we're doing a sale of, 80% conversion, we're actually a bit disappointed, and we have to be a little bit realistic that pre 2020, if we'd have been doing 80% conversion on the on the 22nd or 23rd of October, we'd have been looking at the figures and thinking the figures are wrong. So we'd have been doing 60%, 55, 60%. So the market is still very, very strong. There's no question about it. It's still a very strong marketplace, and I don't think that. I'm not sure whether people are actually considering, the outside effects of what's going to happen, but I do agree. I think I have a concern about where we're going. We're seeing these rising numbers, and will there be a knee-jerk reaction like we've seen before? Will the government? They didn't put a plan B into place yesterday. What concerns me is we don't go to a plan B, we go straight to a plan C, and I think that would be a big mistake and a big problem for everybody.
And in terms of, David, in terms of that retail space, that every year we know historically that we always saw that activity December time building up for January. It slowly came forward into November and then into sort of October as many of the supermarkets and larger groups realised to stock up they need to be buying early, because there's a lot of focus in that January market, expectations that consumers are out after the new year in the market ready to buy. What's our thoughts on that for this year? Do we think that activity will start to pick up again, or do you think fairly, this is going to be fairly a flat all the way through now till the new year?
Well, I don't have a definitive answer other than to say that it does depend on what the government actually does with the plan B, plan C. I mean, I've heard today that maybe we're going to go straight to plan C, which, as Andy just said, is more draconian. So if that is the case, obviously that could have an effect on the market. Having said that, the market's been there at least twice already, and it's a fairly strong market. So I think it will be hopefully much the same. People will need to buy stock. I don't think they should put off from buying stock, because I think it will only go one way into the new year, which is up. I don't see new car production being able to cope with the demand. So I think dealers need to be aware of that. I'm sure they are. And because there's some very, very, very long lead times, of course, on new product, which is one of the reasons, the driver for obviously record used car prices. And I don't really see, we've just sold a Mini for £30,000 when they were advertising Minis new, if you could get one for £32,000. So that's how close it is to new prices. And I believe in some instances, used cars have been sold retail for higher than the list price of a new car. So it's unprecedented, really. So, but I think generally speaking, we are conditioned now. We have had two lockdowns, and we've stayed in business. We've managed it well. So I think as an industry, we've learned a lot in the last 18 months, which will stand us in good stead for the next 2 or 3 months ahead. So that's my take on it anyway.
And I mean, you mentioned the Mini there, which is obviously EV. So we'll come back to EV in a minute, because I wouldn't mind getting a view from both of you on the electric vehicle sector at the minute. But Andy, from a vendor's perspective, because we talk a lot about buyers and we talk a lot about that retailer, but we've got the vendors that are putting the vehicles into the market that have experienced some very strong performances over recent months since the 12th of April, as we know, in terms of first-time conversions, percentage of the values and overall conversions. What's happening in that market at the minute? Do they need to start, because you always run a risk that when demand is outstripping supply, the details start to get a little bit relaxed in terms of appraisal, conditioning, the paperwork, description, things like that. What's happening in the vendor space at the minute?
I think one of the main jobs that we have is not only selling cars, but it's managing expectations. And I think particularly managing vendor expectations, as you say, Phil, a lot of these vendors have been, looking at the CAP reports, and they've been enjoying CAP returns of 108, 110%. And I think maybe they just have to, rein those expectations in a little bit and start looking at and start taking the money, whereas before they wouldn't do. And I think that is, that's going to be really important over the next 2 months. And ultimately they've got to start considering these bids. I've heard the P word, the provisional word, more today. I've been doing sales, and I've heard the word today and over the past few weeks. The past few days. The P word, and which I've not heard before. But the word provisional, when a car is still £400 over cat clean. Now, to me, you know, the art of selling a car is, as we all know, that magic words, the car is on sale, will encourage people to buy, will encourage people to give that little bit more money, and therefore, you know, uncertainty doesn't do anybody any good. So, you know, we try and encourage people to get those cars on sale and allow them to find their true value. And I think that's what we need to do. And that's the message that we're trying to get across from the rostrums.
And I mean, we had a chat, you know, we were chatting just before the recording of the show, and between the, you know, looking at it for me, in between, you know, David, yourself from a buyer's perspective, and Andy from an auctioneer's perspective. But Andy, you were sort of talking with David about that role of the auctioneer, what they're there to do, you know, get the car for the buyer, because there's a job to do for the buyer, there's a job to do for the vendor, which is you know, it's a fascinating role that you've got that double side to manage, haven't you?
Yeah, well, you know, look, everybody that's known me over the years has known that I've got one saying: there's two types of auctioneers. There's a bid maker and a bid taker. Now, when the job's on fire, as it has been, anybody can stand up there and take bids, because you haven't basically got to do anything. You could put anybody up there. Phil, you could have sold some cars. I have to say that. You could have stood up there with a gavel, or maybe not, but you could have had a go. But you could have stood up there with a gavel, and you'd have had the same results as all us.
I knew that gavel that you gave me was for something.
Exactly, but the skill is about making a bid, and it's encouraging people to make a bid. And the difference has been, over the past few months, if you've got a car reserved at £10,000, we've been asking 11, and we've been bid 11. You know, over the past week, that car is probably still going to make between £10,500 and £11,000, but the difference is we're having to start it at 9. So we're having to throw a little bit of corn out, and we're having to encourage those buyers to bid rather than full pelt ahead, you know, whether it be in physical sense or in online, pressing that button and thinking I want to own the car. And that's the difference, you know, and an auctioneer's job is 50% standing there on the rostrum and doing the job, but the other 50% is a little bit of psychology, and that's where it comes in. And that's where the skill of a good quality auctioneer who will make a difference to a vendor and to a buyer will come into it. And I think that's what we need to remember as well. And as we go, you know, over the next sort of 2 or 3 months. And
David, does this feel familiar with you as a buyer, seeing the good auctioneers against the maybe not so good auctioneers on the stands?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I've always maintained that an auctioneer's primary role is to get a bid, and is just, I think, back that up really. So absolutely, we don't want any favours, or, you know, we just want the auctioneers to act fairly for both sides and take the bids. It's the bids, and then obviously the vendor to decide. It's with the auction, discussing it with the vendor. But I think from my experience of auctions, it's been a positive one. Most of the auctioneers are doing that, and the successful companies are still in business doing it, so they must be doing something right. So, you know, it's a difficult job. It's a skillful job. And it's a job that's respected, I think, both sides. Certainly from a buyer's perspective, anyway. So I think people like Andy and his colleagues are very well respected, and I don't have any qualms about using the services. We'll not mention the name on here, but anyway, there we go. But no, it is. It's all about working well with all parties concerned, and I think the top auctioneers do that. Yeah, for sure.
And switching the conversation slightly, I mean, you mentioned earlier about the Mini, and you know, for anybody that does follow you on social media, that, you know, that was an EV Mini.
Yeah, it was.
And is that how is the EV market going? Was that your first experience in that, or have you had other EVs? How did you find it? And you know, were the buyer and the activity slightly different? Did you have to, you know, how would you manage that sale and those conversations on it?
Well, the very first EV, Phil, was about 5 years ago now. It was a Renault Zoe.
Yeah.
And that had something like 3,000% interest in it, which was absolutely amazing. Couldn't believe it. Neither could Auto Trader, but it was horrendous the amount of interest that car had. And then we've had some hybrids since then in between. But I have to say that by and large, we haven't really stepped into the market again. We've watched it from afar, really. This came up through a recommendation, and so it was sourced directly from the owner, and it was just the same as a Zoe. The interest was phenomenal, and I'm still getting inquiries today on it. Actually, this morning I've had 2 this morning. So it's just a matter of replacing that car, which is the difficult one. And of course, timing is everything, isn't it? And the timing couldn't be any better, could it? Because as I bought the car and got home, got to the unit here with it, there was an announcement of the fuel shortage. So,
yeah.
So it was an amazing blessing, really, to buy an electric Mini. What had it done? It covered less than, was it about 800 miles, I think, on a 70 reg. So it was a ridiculously low mileage car. But yes, it was a very good car, sold very quickly, and could have sold it 10 times over. So we'll be buying some more whenever they become available.
And Andy, I mean, in the auction world, EV is now starting to. We know it's always been there in small volumes, but we know it's starting to ramp up now. We know that September the Tesla was the highest selling vehicle there. We've just mentioned Tesla, obviously, in terms of a fastest growing brand. What's it like? Are we starting to see more of that now? Are the buyers any different than what they are for combustion engines? Do you, as auctioneers, need to do anything different around EV? And what's your thoughts on the market of EVs?
Well, the market is still, I would describe it as tentative. There's still a very small buyer base for those cars. There's not a lot of people are nervous. They're still not that confident. I think from an auctioneering point of view, we have to point out different things. Cables. Have they got cables? A lot of cars are coming back now. They've not got cables, which is really important. And I think we just got to look at things a little bit different. But from an auction point of view, the market is nowhere near as strong as it is on a retail.
It's still a little bit slow in demand unless it's a specific car.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
It is. Yeah.
So I think in terms of what's happening then. So if I was to ask you to sum up where you see the retail and wholesale market for the remainder of the year for the listeners, let's go. What would you say, Andy, to that first from a wholesale auction perspective?
Well, I think the low volumes will keep the market strong. I think that we probably have plateaued out. I don't see, again, we're probably going to see a cap increase of 3 years 60, probably just under 2%, 1.7 to 2%. I don't see any significant decrease in values. I think it will be, I think there'll be a smaller increase, if any increase, from November into December. I think it will be the other interesting thing, and I don't know what David thinks. I think January is going to be interesting. Will we see, historically, we know we've seen January before, prices have shot through the roof, the demand's there. I wonder whether we will actually see that big January spike that we've seen before, or my view is that January spike has never been healthy, because the January spike's gone until the second week in February and the market has dipped considerably. And I think what we've seen over the past couple of years, we've seen a much flatter, a strong but flatter market, which I think is better for everybody. So my view is market's not going to drop off the cliff. prices on, particularly on quality vehicles, will still remain very strong. Vendors need to really take stock of what they've got, look at the bids, and start reading the market a little bit more, starting to listen to, listen to people like you, Phil, reading your insight report, looking at figures, understanding what's going to happen, because I think, and become a little bit of a, looking into the future. Don't get caught. Don't think that they've turned a bid down. Are they going to get more money? I think they need to look at every bid sensibly. But I think we're in for a relatively strong end to the year. It might have dipped a little bit what we've seen in the year, but nothing dramatic. I think next year could well be a different story mid-year if we do see some units. And interestingly, on numbers, I was speaking to somebody yesterday who told me that they'd been down to Cornwall, and they'd come past Bristol, and we all know the big bridge when you're just outside Bristol. I think is it Portishead or Portway there? When you come off, you got all those cars parked on the side of the docks. And he told me yesterday it was empty apart from a few vans, and I think that says a lot for supply, because that place was always heaving with new cars. So I think that's going to be, it'll be how quickly they can get these components to get the new cars done to start, the cycle of the car coming back into play. So that would be my view.
And David, you operate in a slightly different market in terms of the volumes and your customer expectations and your customer service levels. Where do you see now the sort of the remainder of the fourth quarter of the year and thoughts and hopes and expectations heading into January?
So I think what will if you can get the cars and you can prepare them, I think you may have to put a little bit more time in preparation. I think retail prices could be a little bit tighter. So I think we may have to adjust to the market that we're going into in November, December, January. Certainly November, December. But I think with supply of new cars being completely almost nothing, I think that plays into the used car market well. And I think that will bode well for quite an interesting but profitable 3 months. I'm looking at November, December, and January. I think that quarter for me should be profitable. We've got the cars going into it, so we're in a good point now where we've got some decent stock. Just going through preparation, as you say. Obviously, those that know me know just how much store I put my preparation. So I've got 1,000 new cotton buds arrived this morning for the inside. So We'll continue to do sales, but I think we may just have to tweak the prices somewhat. So there could be a slight lowering of prices maybe, but I think overall it's a positive market, and I'm quite looking forward to it really. I think it'll be quite an interesting time. And January, Andy, for me, it's been a little bit different each year really. You get some years where it's gone really mad at the beginning, and you get nothing. This year was nothing until about a week to go, and then it just exploded towards the end of January. So I don't know really. I had quite a bit of stock this year at the beginning of the year, which meant I had a really strong quarter. The sort of, I know it wasn't asked in the question, but the difficult period was the second quarter for me when it really kicked in with the prices. So I think it's going to be okay. I think we'll be fine.
Fantastic. Well, I mean, as always, it's been a pleasure chatting to you two guys, and it's sharing your thoughts right at the sharp end of what's going on. So I'm sure the listeners would have enjoyed it the same. So it would be remiss of me, as Andy has pointed out there, about the insight report that I've been working on behind the scenes over the last few months. That is now live in the marketplace. It's the fourth insight report from Cox Automotive in collaboration with Grant Thornton. If you've not seen it in the social space, then I would ask where you've been, because it will be everywhere over from now through any of our social channels. If you do need anything on it, then please feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to support you. But that's it for this week. So you've been listening to the weekly Motor Trade Radio podcast. It's brought to you in association with eBay Motors Group. And thank you for joining us in all the chatter that matters. Curtis will be back again next week, showing off his tan from his much-deserved week away. And we'll also be returning with Steve Whitton's Men Able Moment. So until then, it's goodbye from me.
It's goodbye from him.
And it's goodbye from them.